guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from Canada, English language, released in the year 2015, directed by John Ainsley, and this film is called The Sublet. So The Sublet is about an aspiring actor. He's about to get married to his beautiful wife. He also has a young son, and he moves his family to the different side of the city in order to try and further his career. He really wants a partner movie, and he's going to stop at nothing to get that part. So he becomes very obsessed with this, and he doesn't realise that his wife has been neglected. Now, his wife doesn't like the new apartment. She believes that some very strange things are happening, and so she's tasked with looking after the young son all by herself all day, and she becomes very lonely, and this is starting to have a very wearing effect on her. So she finds a diary that belonged in one of the rooms that belonged to a previous tenant, and this tenant has actually written about very similar things that this woman's going through, and to this woman's horror, this previous tenant has written about a downward spiral she has as far as psychology is concerned, and she basically went crazy and murdered her family. So this woman is starting to feel that she might go through a very similar thing if she doesn't get out of this environment. So she's trying desperately to get the attention of her fiance in order to try and get them out of the apartment, but whether or not it's too late is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now, my thoughts on The Sublet. This is a low-budget independent horror film, so I do have to make allowances for some of the mistakes it makes, but I will say that it's a very interesting film based on the fact that it does take clear inspiration from Roman Polanski's The Tenant. Now, Roman Polanski's The Tenant was all about slow progression of a woman's mentality as far as it's starting to get weaker and weaker, and it starts to become a psychological battlefield. And I thought The Sublet did emulate that to some extent in the way that this woman is starting to lose her mind, and when she starts reading this diary, she starts to get even more paranoid that she's suffering the same fate. And so you're constantly questioning whether or not she is actually in reality, or in fact she's just becoming a person based on her environment, the fact that she's so lonely and how much of a negative effect that can have on someone. So it is a movie about this relationship that's starting to tear apart, but you don't know whether or not it's her or in fact it's just the relationship that's bad for her. So I thought that was fairly good. It was a fairly creepy experience, and there were some set pieces that I thought worked fairly effectively, and I thought the ending, there's a very shocking scene of violence at the end that I thought really capped off that slow pressure cooker that the movie really wants to create. I thought the acting from the main character was fairly decent, although she doesn't really have any help from the script. I thought her reactions to certain events was fairly authentic, and there are some very strange moments that really make you scratch your head thinking, what is actually going on here? Is that I felt as though I was going on this journey with her as far as this very surreal dream is concerned. And so you do have that very fine line between reality and fantasy that you're not quite sure where it's going, because the further it goes, the weirder it gets. And so I thought, okay, to some extent this director really does capture the mind of someone who was actually going a little bit crazy. And so I thought the side story of this diary, I thought it did add a little bit more to the story, although I thought it really wasn't needed as much because it was kind of wasted. I thought the side story wasn't as interesting as it really could have been, but it does put a cat amongst the pigeons, and it does give this main character something else to think about. So I could excuse that to some extent, and the movie doesn't go for very long, so it doesn't really get boring, but unfortunately that's where the positives stop. There are a lot of negatives, and unfortunately the negatives outweigh the positives quite considerably, is that this movie wants to emulate a brilliant filmmaker, and because this director doesn't have the quality of Roman Polanski, you really notice the shortcomings. This is way too ambitious. The director has bitten way more than he could chew because he's not prepared to do the hard yards as far as slow progression is concerned. This movie goes for 82 minutes and it's way too quick, is that straight away you get into the base of what's going on. Straight away some very strange things are happening, and it cuts from one week to another week, to the next week, to the next week, and I kept thinking that there were minor details that weren't gone into, and because they're lacking the minor details, I couldn't go on the journey with these characters as much as I really wanted to. So the script doesn't allow any of these characters to blossom. As I said, the main character is somewhat interesting because she's the one that's having to go through all these situations, but the character of the fiance, the man who wants to further his career, I thought was a very weak character. And there are some other characters that come in that are very strange, but I just didn't feel as though the script was allowing these characters to blossom, because the overall runtime doesn't allow that to happen. And so I felt as though John Ainsley had this idea to make a Roman Polanski style of film, but someone only gave him 82 minutes, so he panicked. He felt as though, okay, this is 82 minutes, I can't get into characters, I have to get into the situation very, very quickly. And because he gets into the situation too quickly, therefore the situation is not complemented by characters. And if you don't have characters in the situation that are very interesting, the situation itself doesn't work. And unfortunately, that is why the film falls flat. As far as the production is concerned, I thought the cinematography was fairly decent in capturing a very claustrophobic feeling that this house had. It almost felt like the house was an entity and it was slowly suffocating this woman. But there were some camera angles that really didn't work because I felt as though the focus really wasn't very good. And so it's supposed to focus on one particular object in one scene that's supposed to scare you, but you don't know where you're supposed to look. And so it's a very shaky cam as well. So I thought there was some amateurish quality in this movie. But as I said, it's a low budget independent horror film, so I have to make allowances. But unfortunately, the low budget aspect of this film really does hurt it, because I felt as though some of the camera shots were very amateurish and it really didn't capture me in the moment. And then right at the end, I thought to myself, it really shot itself in the foot. I'm not going to tell you what happens at the end, but it needs the viewer to have closure. And I think that having open endings is a lot better, because it does complement the overall film, and it does complement something of a Roman Polanski film. But unfortunately, these days, the viewer complains if they don't get closure, and as a result of that, it does dampen the effect of films quite considerably. And so unfortunately, the Sublet really runs into that problem as well. So overall, yeah, there are some scenes that are repeated, especially some outside shots of this apartment. There are some shots that are repeated when she wakes up in the morning. She has a shower, she pours some coffee. I thought to myself, okay, there's a lot of filler in this film, and it only goes for 82 minutes, so that's ultimately a problem. So I didn't think that the plan was really thought out that well, and I thought the execution was lacking, and it didn't complement the ambition that this director had. I can applaud the fact that he wants to try and emulate a brilliant director, but if you're not a brilliant director yourself, and you're out of your comfort zone, this is exactly how this movie will basically pan out. So I thought, as though, as I said, it's a director who's out of his comfort zone and unfortunately can't execute the film to a satisfactory level, and as a result of that, I'm only going to give the Sublet 1.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, thank you for watching movies, and I'll see you later.